Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, comics, and much, much more, especially today because we have a wonderful guest to talk to this week. If you had a favorite childhood TV show from the 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s, and honestly going into now, he has probably had a hand in somehow creating the show or getting it on the air at the very least. So we're excited to talk to Michael Hirsch in a little bit. But first, I have to introduce you to my other half. I don't want to say my better half because that's not true. Alex, how you doing?
Well, I'm not the better half for hair, but I might be the better half.
I'm definitely the hair of the group.
I might be the better half for winning smile as soon as I get these damn braces off.
That's true.
I am excited that we will be talking today, the A in the Smack, because Michael Hirsch has, unknowns to me until starting to read his book, holy crap, I think I watched 90% of everything they put out in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, especially the 90s, man. He had his hands in the Ace Ventura show. He had his hands in the Beetlejuice show, which I know that's more 80s. But going through his IMDb, I'm really tempted, just so everyone knows, he's not in the room yet. I'm really tempted to ask him about Caillou, only because I don't know what the hate is about. I just know that every person from Gen X and Gen Z, what are we, millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, everyone hates Caillou, and I don't know why. And at this point, I'm too scared to ask. So I'm kind of tempted to ask him, how do you feel about people and their feelings towards Caillou? Because I don't know what it's about. And also, listeners, if you know, tell me in the Discord or on Twitter or something. I need to know what the hate is about Caillou.
Well, I can't wait. Let's just get to it. Let's get this promo and let's do it.
First, we got to hear from our buddy Caesar at No on 15. We'll be right back with Michael Hirsch.
I'm 15. No, I'm 15. No, I'm 15. No, I'm 15.
So, what's our show about? It's about some dudes talking about movies, just like this.
With Goofy screaming with them.
So you're talking that they should have replaced it with a Tom and Jerry scream or something like that?
Tom and Jerry screaming.
Or you might hear something like this.
Oh my gosh.
That whole movie, waiting to see what happens with Blanca, is the most aggravating thing in that film. But for the most part, we talk movies from the 80s, 90s, and today. And if you grace us with your ear time, you might hear one of these 30-second gems like this.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did not get a chance to watch this one this week.
Give it to him anyways. We're gonna give it to you, anyway. You ready?
I'm gonna give you the 30-second review of Tron Uprising.
All right. Start the clock and then. So give us a shot and listen to the No on 15 Allcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
No, I'm 15.
And we're back, everyone. And as promised, Alex and I are here with just a titan in the industry as far as he and I are concerned. We are here with Michael Hirsch, animation producer extraordinaire. Michael, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's my pleasure to join you tonight.
So we have one very important question that we always start off with our guests. And that question is, what you doing? What do you do when you're not producing amazing works of animation? What do you do for fun?
Well, that's a good question. Today I was hanging out by the pool because it was a beautiful sunny day in Toronto. I'm based in Toronto. And what else did I do today? Went and bought bread. That's always an exciting thing. Traveled halfway around town to the Good Bakery.
So being in Toronto, I think the most important follow-up question is Maple Leafs fan?
No, I'm actually not a sports fan. I am a comic book, animation, toy collector kind of fan. But
well, looking at that shelf behind you, my inner child is very jealous of a lot of stuff happening back there. Yeah. We've got a Tintin, we've got an R2-D2, a 3PO, a Care Bear, an Ewok. Man, that is quite the shelf.
And a Babar.
Yes, and a Babar.
And a Huxley pig from Busy Town Mysteries.
Yes, I was just about to ask if that was from Busy Town.
And then Caillou below with, Johnny Test on the other side.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Caillou is a little beyond my time. Before we really dive into your book, which Animation Nation, How We Created a Cartoon Empire, by the time this episode comes out, it'll have hit U.S. shelves. Definitely check it out. But I teased this in our intro, which you didn't hear, but I have no filter, which my wife tells me is sometimes a good thing, but in this case, it might be a bad thing. But I grew up outside of the Caillou bubble, but I have heard so many people from my generation and my sister's generation who are a few years ahead of me, they just do not like Caillou, and I don't understand what the hate is, and I don't know if you're aware of it.
Yeah.
What is it with Caillou that you think turns some of the people from our generation off?
So a lot of people really love Caillou. It was a big hit on PBS for 2 decades, maybe longer. It's a big hit around the world. So Caillou has its fans, right? But when you deal with some of these preschool shows, they sometimes, have the opposite reaction on some people, right? In the case of Caillou, some people think his voice is too whiny, right?
Okay.
And other people don't like it. When I stepped in and was producing it, we tried to make his voice less whiny than it had been previously. But nonetheless, everybody still thought it was whiny. So it's part of the character. And little kids, there are whiny kids and there are non-whiny kids. And, this is about a kid who's like a real kid. He's just a little bit whiny.
All three of mine have their days like that. I fully understand it. And I think I think you put it really well, because like these are shows designed for kids, and in certain cases, the parents aren't going to fully grasp it, but again, it's not necessarily meant for you. So, let the kid enjoy what they want.
That's right. And a lot of parents don't like watching these preschool shows with the kids because the kids want to see the same episode over and over again, and eventually it drives them batty. So it's something I've had to live with since I started producing preschool shows, which really I did in the beginning of my animation career. So
yeah, what a career it's been. Which again, going back to the book, Animation Nation: How We Built a Cartoon Empire. Your career really kind of starts in the 70s, which you had some independent stuff. With oh goodness, I'm blanking on the name of the Voulez-vous coucher avec God. That was Voulez-vous
coucher avec God was my experimental feature film that's really started when I was a college student in the 60s, the mid 60s, and then it got finished by about 72. And
okay, yep.
But by that time I was already on to getting into a more commercial world, doing the 5 letters for the Sesame Street series in the first season.
Yeah, and that's one thing we definitely need to get into. But I really want to talk about the book, which the book grabs you right away because you open with the chapter that I think you very well know people are most interested in, and that's how you got the job of producing the animated features in the Star Wars Holiday Special. And the way you lay it out, even in the book, just comes across wonderfully, because you're kind of going along with you in that journey, and you feel the nerves of what's happening as you're being carted around into mysterious locations, and you end up at a location where they're filming scenes, special effects scenes, I believe, if I remember correctly, for Empire Strikes Back before you have to meet up with George Lucas. And I can only imagine the nerves that you're having while you're walking through all these things, where it's just like they're trying to put blinders on you and you're just like, what's that? What's this?
No, actually, one of the things about my personality is that I was never a nervous person. So that wasn't the reaction, but it was really critical for us to actually, get to do the project, because we were a company based in Toronto. We'd had our first half-hour animated special that had played in the US and the rest of the world. But because it had grabbed George Lucas's attention, we got this chance to do this cartoon, and I had flown in to meet George and, kind of land it, or, get it done and get the deal done. And I had this inner sense of confidence, and this is something I really want to share with, young people who are listening, who are just in their early stages of their career. You really need to be confident in yourself. And, you hear that from a lot of people, but it's so true. You got to believe that you're going to get it. You're going to, succeed. And I was convinced when I was meeting with George that we were the only company that could give him what he wants, whatever that was. I had no idea it was until he actually told us, right? But actually, the meeting started with talking about the style that we were going to do the 10-minute cartoon, which is called The Faithful Wookiee, and was part of that 2-hour holiday special. I had talked with my partners, Patrick and Clive, at Nelvana at the time about it, and we had decided that the best look that we could actually accomplish would be something inspired by the French artist Mobius, who was a very popular artist in the heavy metal magazine and that genre. And we thought that if we used that style, we could do something that would look really good and we could deliver. And so when I mentioned Mobius to George, he said, yeah, he was thinking the same thing. That was right. We were on the same path. And so the conversation went very easily, because right away we were talking about the same kind of look. And then the rest was, how we would deliver, like when he needed it. And he needed it yesterday, right? It was a situation where they had waited to the last minute to order the special, and then this was the last part of the special that was being organized, and it was in his hands, and he was busy making Empire Strikes Back. So, we had at the time, I think, perhaps 4 months or so to, do the show. And even though it's a 10-minute cartoon and not a half hour or an hour, whenever you do something for the first time, there's a lot of lead time in design. So it really was a very small amount of time to do what we had to do.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm impressed about with your book, Michael, is that you are very just straightforward, and you have this tenacity. Like, you talk about in one chapter that you were trying to, you heard about a cave nearby that you could sleep in for a few weeks so you could save money, just so you could keep producing stuff. And I would never think, a college student would go like, yeah, I could save like $20 a month on rent if I just sleep in a cave for 6 weeks until it gets too cold and I have to rent an apartment. And that your company really didn't have a strong financial advisor for a long time. So you were constantly behind or in debt or catching up or behind. And you just never thought to slow down. It's just, we got to make money. We got to eat. We got to pay animators. We got to keep going. And your story is just one of tenacity, of we're just going to keep plugging away until this thing works. We're going to, especially, I love that you mentioned when you're getting to Babar and Care Bears and a lot of the 80s cartoons, that the reason why your work stands the test of time is you didn't cheap out on how many cells you were using. You were doing double or triple the amount of the other shows of the era. So that's why going back to them still looks so good.
Yeah, so we really had a conviction that because we were this small studio in Toronto and we were looking to break into, quote unquote showbiz, the real showbiz, we had to do it with quality, right? We weren't going to do it because we were there, next to somebody, et cetera. We had to deliver more than anybody else. And then that became our thing, right? We were committed to the quality and we wanted everything we did to do that. And then early on, we realized that the long-term value of what we were doing for the shows that we actually owned was what we call library, the fact that we would own these shows and that you could sell them again and again to different buyers, right, as time went on. And we were pretty convinced and aware of the fact that eventually shows would end up in the home directly, right, and that this would be a fantastic unlocking of value in a library. So we were building this library, and our thought was, well, if we produce it with quality, people will be able to watch it 20 years, 30 years later, and it'll still have that high quality. And what's interesting is when you think back, we had the experience of the Bugs Bunny shorts, which were produced with that kind of tremendous theatrical quality, and people were watching them, 30, 40, 50 years later, and, enjoying them just as much as they did the first time. Whereas something with lower quality, often you don't want to see. There are exceptions, but by and large, I think quality is a winner.
But I enjoy also just how frank you are about it. I really enjoyed the anecdote you added where when you got married, you left your wife on the steps of the courthouse to go finish having a lunch with some friends, like securing a deal.
Well, the matter is, while I was successful in my animation career, I was also successful in marriage because I'm still married to the same woman, and we've lived together for 50 years. But I keep paying for those mistakes. Keeps, I keep paying the sort of, oh, please forgive me for that one. Oh, and that one. So I was really kind of oblivious to what, how to behave, right, in those moments, because I was so fixated on work. And when I look back on it, I do regret it, because I do have to keep apologizing. So my advice to, again, young people out there is be a little more, mindful than I was. Don't use me as an example.
Hey, you're doing something right. 50 years, that's worth something. When it comes to producing these shows and acquiring these shows, can you talk about a little bit of the difference between like what it was like in the early days, where it seemed almost like you guys were trying to grab at anything and everything you can, whereas now are you still kind of in that same mode where it's like, what's the pitch? Yes, we need this. Or are you more selective now with your experience?
Well, I would say that today you generally have to try to do, if you have an animation studio, let me go back and explain that. If you have an animation studio, you have a lot of overhead, because once you aggregate the good animators and the good layout artists and the good talent, you don't want to lose them. So you've got to keep them working. So sometimes you have to take projects that aren't necessarily, your favorite projects. You've got to have projects, you got to pay the rent, you got to pay their salaries. Otherwise, you're always letting people go and having to recruit them back. And it's not a successful way to run an animation company. So you really need the continuity of work. So we always differentiated between the shows that were our shows, meaning like the ones we really were passionate about, etc., and things that we did to pay the rent. But because we weren't a well-funded company from the beginning, we were just, we started with $10, 3 partners with $10 between them, and we were just reinvesting and, paying ourselves almost nothing, but reinvesting the money that we made into the next thing. Because of that, we were really mindful of the fact that we needed to do some work to keep the studio going and to keep people busy. And so that formula of having, doing a babar and at the same time doing a strawberry shortcake. Now, strawberry shortcake turned out to be a great hit, etc. But when we started with it, we didn't know that we were doing it, to pay the rent.
By the way, my childhood would like to thank you for finishing the Care Bears movie so quickly, because when I was born, my mom gave me a baby Tugs, a stuffed plushie, and she would have me watch the Care Bears movies and those short and the cartoon, and I still have it. It's not in my bed anymore, but I still have it downstairs with all my other stuffed animals in a nice large Papa Zone. So I do want to thank you for that. The quality and the passion, because just having read how you kind of transition from all these experimental movies, and you talk about your friends kind of like being like just kind of hang out in Toronto as kind of like long-haired kind of hippies, just doing whatever you can, and then pursuing animation. You care so much about making the child's experience last. Like you don't, because even if you said like you're building the library, you want quality, but there are cartoons that you did not produce that I've tried going back to watching and going like, oh yeah, I like that, and it's just so off-putting to look at.
Yeah.
As an adult, not having the childhood mystique and wonder of what's in front of me, but being able to enjoy the stories, the animation, the beauty of the cells. I just have to thank you again.
Well,
I'm gushing, but I really do appreciate it.
So
I need to gush a little bit too about the Care Bears. I'm sorry to interrupt, Michael, just because when I was born in '85, so like I came into the world when the Care Bears movie also did. But I remember very vividly, I would watch that as many times as I could. Like we were talking about with Caillou, I was one of those kids that just watched the same thing over and over again. And I had a Care Bears bottle that I loved, and my mom needed to wean me off the bottle at some point. And like one of my earliest memories is waking up one day expecting my Care Bears bottle, and my mom telling me the Care Bears needed it for another needy child. And so I took it a little less hard than I probably would have any other time, because the Care Bears needed it.
So what inspired me was when I was, 4, 5, 6 years old, I lived in a neighborhood that had a great public library, and I'd walk to the public library with my younger sister. And I think when I cross the street now, it was this huge, wide boulevard. And I don't know how, as kids, we did it by ourselves, but we did, and in those days, there were still deliveries being done with horses. So you had horses, you had cars, it was like, and buses. It was all a lot of traffic. At the library, this librarian became world famous because she developed a method of reading stories to children, and she would rework the actual physical book to make it easy for her to read it while you looked at the pictures. And then she would also organize puppet shows, and she was very creative in how she did this. So at that young age, I listened to the best of children's literature of the time being read out loud by a terrific librarian and it being brought to life. And I think that inspired me to, make sure that what we did would be as great an experience for kids as what I had when I was, a 5-year-old.
So I do kind of want to talk about the elephant in the room that is Star Wars. You also helped produce Star Wars Droids, which it has had a little bit of a resurgence. Like I've seen a lot of people talking about it, and along with the Star Wars holiday feature, there are a lot of things that have bled over from Droids and the holiday special into newer live action adaptations. Can you talk about how seeing some of those things being readapted into live action, have you taken any pride in being a part of the lineage that led to those sort of things, especially in Star Wars?
Yeah, listen, working with George Lucas and his creative team was a fantastic experience, not only for me, but for our studio, all the animators, the sound editors, the editors, the designers, the illustrators, all got the benefit of working with the best, in the world. And, when we were doing the 10-minute short and George was, in that first meeting explain what it was, and he says, and you'll introduce Boba Fett. Of course, at that point, nobody knew other than George or his people who Boba Fett was. But I said, oh, that's great. But it turned out to be great, right? People, he was a very successful character. Evidently, the toy was one of the best-selling, action figures. And Mandalorian has been a terrific show, that brought him to life. But my experience working with George was really one of being pushed into doing even better work and being, more, what's the word for it, more thorough in every detail. Like we learned really the importance of paying attention to every single detail. Not that we had ignored details before, but it was just reinforced and it was pushed to a degree that we had never seen people work to that degree. So overall, it was a career changer. And then George would give me advice and talk about some of what we're doing. Like when we were doing our feature film, Rock and Roll, he looked at early footage, he gave us some critique, the animators appreciated it, it affected how they animated the characters. We wanted to put in lots more effects, and he had some good advice about that too. He was obviously a big believer in effects. And so, the Star Wars experience, being part of that Star Wars universe, there's nothing better, right? And when I think of my childhood, I actually watched, the old Buck Rogers serials and the Flash Gordon serials in a movie theater. At the time, it was a triple bill that ran, 10-year-old or 15-year-old serials. The sprockets were probably falling off of them by that point. But it was, again, when I first saw Star Wars, it brought that whole thing to life to a degree that which, as a kid, I couldn't have imagined, right? Like Star Wars was really revolutionary. And so it spoke to me as, in terms of the child in me, and it inspired all of us.
So a question I have about a different franchise. How the heck do you go, because you have a relationship with HBO with Babar, how do you go from, or whose brilliant idea was it to go, Tales from the Crypt, that's got to be a cartoon for kids?
So one of my partners at Nelvana at that time was Topper Taylor, and he was later a partner in Cookie Jar, my next company. And Topper had the idea that Tales from the Crypt, would adapt to a cartoon for kids. And, he was, terrific at negotiating rights, and he got the rights to that property. And we made a great show. I think Tales from the Crypt Keeper was fabulous.
Oh, no. I completely agree because I had a very young mom. She had me when she was a teenager. So she thought it was appropriate for me to watch things like Terminator and Tales from the Crypt. I remember seeing Terminator 2 in theaters and crying my 8-year-old eyes out as he's being lowered into lava. So I remember seeing the live action Tales from the Crypt, and then I was watching the cartoon, and I was just like, this might be scarier in some aspects than the actual live action. Because when you strip out a lot of the stuff that's on HBO at 11 p.m. at night, and you distill it down to a kids show, it can get a little creepier.
Yeah, and the original comics. So again, I grew up reading the EC comics when they, were first run. And I was also at the time, reading the newspaper and seeing that, there was this psychiatrist at the time, Dr. Wertheim, I think, who was angry that EC comics were in the newsstands and the kids could get them because he felt it was damaging to children and their psyche. And so the comic book code came in as a result of the whole EC comic thing. But I was a fan, and again, in a sense, growing up in the era I grew up in, I had the chance to be the fan of a lot of things that we then got to make as cartoons later on.
One of the questions I have for you is, how did you navigate? Because you're still producing now, which is fantastic. You were still after it after leaving Nelvana and starting and acquiring other companies. How do you feel about this transition from cells to computers? Obviously, you've navigated it well, but do you feel that it enhances, takes away, or is just another medium, I guess?
I think, to some degree, it is a different medium, right? Because essentially, it changed the look of animation to some degree, and it also allowed you to do more for the same money. So, when we were talking before about Star Wars, George had just started Pixar around the time that we were doing Ewoks and Droids, and he would have loved to use CGI for the two shows, but it was too early, right? It didn't yet exist in a way that would work. But now, and starting in the 90s, it became very feasible to do good shows, and steadily there's been technological and software improvement so that you can make better and better looking shows and more complicated shows. And while that doesn't necessarily improve the writing or improve the voicing or other aspects, right, it does improve the picture, where the picture is quality that just was not achievable back before computerization. One of the things that computers did for animation was it made it more affordable, and it did keep pushing the boundary on quality. So back when we were making A Cosmic Christmas and some of those shorts, some of those specials, and the first Star Wars cartoon, everything was done by hand. We hand painted the cells, and the cost of painting was equal to the cost of animating them. So that seemed out of whack, right? And the amount of time it would take would be a long amount of time. So it really increased the production time. So essentially, software and technology have just made it easier to do, better and better animated shows.
One of the things that I noticed in the 90s especially, and Alex kind of brought it up when he talked about Tales from the Crypt Keeper, was there did seem to be like this rush of getting more mature content to be digestible for kids. And like, as you did work with Tim Burton on the Beetlejuice animated series, which Beetlejuice, I think you could argue, is more all ages, despite there being an F-bomb in there. But can you talk a little bit about how kind of, I don't want to say scramble, it almost makes it sound desperate, but like what it's like acquiring IPs to adapt for kids, especially if they're slightly more mature for kids, like going back to Tales from the Crypt?
Very clearly at Nelvana and then at Cookie Jar and later at WoW Unlimited, my three companies that I built, we did shows that really stretched what was good for kids. Now, several factors come into play. Kids have been aging up fast, so the kind of content that a kid who's a preschooler will watch, perhaps 20 years earlier, it would have been suitable for a 7-year-old to 10-year-old. And so essentially kids are watching more and more sophisticated stuff. And, so part of that was, providing material that would work for them, but that was a challenge, right? So adapting Tales from the Crypt Keeper was exactly that kind of a thing. And working with Tim Burton on Beetlejuice and adapting that for animation was another example of that, because it was an incredibly sophisticated horror comedy, right? And we wanted to capture all the nuance, but at the same time make it a successful animated show for television, which in those days, it was started on ABC Network and eventually was syndicated on the WB. But essentially, we were always looking for that. So, when you look at what we did for HBO, we went from doing Babar to doing Tintin. Tintin are these great stories that work for kids, but they also work for adults, right? So they're mystery adventure stories in comic book form or graphic novel form, and with artwork that inspired Andy Warhol, that art style. And so, very sophisticated, and it worked. It was a successful show on HBO, and it's successful around the world. And then we did a show called George and Martha, based upon children's books that were incredibly sophisticated, by James Marshall. Maurice Sendak came aboard as a producer because he represented the property and the estate of James Marshall. And we had Nathan Lane and Andrea Martin doing the voices. So Broadway performers, TV performers, movie performers doing, this children's show. So clearly the market was growing. And by that time, when Simpsons came in, it really also expanded the market. I wish we had made The Simpsons, but we didn't, but we got the benefit of it. And during that 80s period, yes, you had a lot of people making children's shows that really were stretching what a kid's show was. When you think of Spielberg's Pinky and the Brain, incredibly sophisticated compared to the old Saturday morning shows that preceded it. When you think of shows like Eek the Cat, very sophisticated. We produce Eek the Cat at Nelvana, but again, a very sophisticated show. And at the time, we went after rights that sometimes were too sophisticated for the time. So we picked up the rights to Rocky Horror Picture Show with the idea of doing a cartoon for that, based upon that. But I think we were ahead of our time. There were a few times like that where we got properties that were, too sophisticated for the marketplace, but it was better to stretch and try to, grow the marketplace and be a leader in the marketplace than just, following along with what everybody else was doing.
If you had been able to do a Rocky Horror Picture Show cartoon with Tim Curry in the 90s or 2000s, that would have been amazing.
It was the 90s.
I can't even think about how incredible that would have been, because there would have been this core audience of high school and college students that would have watched every episode no matter what.
Yeah, we did some cartoons with John Callahan's cartoons. I don't know if you're familiar with John Callahan. He was a quadriplegic artist, and his work appeared in underground newspapers. And they were always about paraplegics and quadriplegics. So we did the first show with the lead being a kid in a wheelchair called Pelswick, and it was on Nickelodeon. And everybody stretched to put that on, because at that time, there was nothing else quite like it. And then we did a show called Quads that was really more like an Adult Swim show, though they didn't carry it, where, the lead character was a head on a skateboard. And that was one of John Callahan's. But while we did things like Care Bears and Babar and Little Bear and Franklin, very sweet things, Maggie and the Ferocious Beast, we also pushed the envelope on, where animation could take you.
You mentioned your book Babar. You have the figurine and everything. Is that your favorite project, to be able to take something from your childhood and carry that forward and just see it so embraced, or do you feel a special connection to it in some manner?
I do feel a special connection to the things that I enjoyed as a kid. and was able to bring to life. But it's I don't know that I have a favorite that way. I think that I liked a lot of the shows we did there. I'm passionate about a lot of them, and because they spoke to the time, right? They were something that you couldn't do exactly that way when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the way animation has evolved. I like the different styles that have evolved. Klasky Chupo, which was a studio that did a lot of Nickelodeon shows.
Yeah, they did the Rugrats especially. Yeah.
Pardon?
They were the ones in charge of like the Rugrats and Ah Real Monsters. Like, yeah, Klasky is classic.
Yeah. So basically, they helped to evolve and develop the style. And then I worked with Fred Seibert in my third company, Wow Unlimited Media, because we merged Frederator with a studio called Mainframe, and we did Bee and Puppy Cat, and we did Castlevania, and we did one more that's escaping me at the moment. But in any case, the looks were totally different. That's one of the things I liked was, not having a house style. So having grown up watching a lot of Hanna-Barbera where there was a house style, but Warner's had a house style in the in the 40s and 50s. At Nelvana and at Cookie Jar, we really avoided having a house style, and we're open to doing things in a unique new look.
Oh, I would agree that Castlevania does not have a house style. That came out of nowhere for me and my wife watching that on Netflix. I did not expect the sophistication of it, because I remember playing Castlevania on different systems and stuff like that, and have such a mature and distinct storyline with that beautiful animation style. It was amazing. I can't give enough praise to that show.
Yeah, well, that show is the work of a great producer, a guy named Kevin Coldy, who had the vision for it and executed it. And he was our head of production at Frederator.
Very cool.
One of the reasons that we single out when we're talking smack superheroes, movies, animation, and comics, we specify animation because we do view it as an all ages storytelling medium. And Guillermo del Toro put it wonderfully when he accepted his best animated feature speech for Pinocchio. What drew you to animation as a storytelling mechanic, as something that you wanted to produce and get out into the world?
So there were a couple of things that drew me to animation. One was I had the opportunity to learn how to do plasticine animation for the Sesame Street project. So that got me into it because I hadn't been in it before. But before that, I really had a theory of filmmaking that was based upon trying to maximize the information in a movie frame. And animation allowed you to always control everything in the frame, and allowed you to maximize what's in the frame. So as soon as I got into animation, I appreciated that control and that ability to maximize what's on the screen. And so that's something that when I think back over this long career that I've, striven for, that I strive for, was to, pack each frame with as much as we could. So that if you could, you'd have something small happening in the background, so you had multiple layers of storytelling in the same individual shot.
Kind of following up on what you were saying there and bringing it back to Animation Nation, the book. I mean, when you read the book, it's fairly obvious as to why you felt the need to, but to verbalize it for listeners and kind of maybe entice them to check out the book, which we do have links to the Amazon and Barnes and Noble page of the book on our episode description. What was it that now made you want to put your story out there for Nelvana and your journey and a little bit of your family history, which also I appreciate. But what inspired you to put that story out there as a book now?
So one of the things I've always done is I've been very interested in recording history. So at the beginning of my career, I came across comic books that had been published in World War II in Canada, because Canada entered World War II before the US, and so there was a government mandated embargo on non-essential goods. And so American comic books which were actually fairly new, they were only 2 or 3 years old as a medium, were stopped at the border. And so Canadian printers and publishers started to make their own comic books. And this history of these comics had been lost in some 25 years after the war ended, when the comic books ended, because they ended with the war, because American comic books came back across the border, and that was the end of the Canadian comics at the time. And so we did a book, a TV show. I acquired the rights to the material and ended up naming my company Nelvana after the heroine of these comic books, Nelvana, the Northern Lights, and arranged for the comic books to be deposited in a museum in Ottawa. And so other people have been able to publish complete sets of like Nelvana or Johnny Canuck comics or some other comic books because of that repository. And so that was a great sort of learning experience about, recording history. So, because otherwise it gets lost. And the second time I did it was when Nelvana was sold. We sold it to Canada's largest children's broadcaster, a company called Chorus. And we wanted to record our history because we thought, well, most of the people in the company will end up drifting off to other places. Let's record this history. So we wrote we commissioned a 30-year history of the company. And then, I was looking now and I was thinking, well, a lot of the people I know, aren't going to necessarily be there, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. So it's important to document the history of this period because animation, the whole industry is changing because now the customer base is a streamer base versus basic cable versus network television versus syndicated television versus home video. And generally the medium does change the content. So I thought, let's capture this history and make sure that it's recorded. So it's that desire to make sure history is preserved that drove me to write the book. And I was also thinking of my father's history because, as you alluded to, it also relates to my family experience. So I grew up as the son of Holocaust survivors. And I grew up hearing my father's stories about being in a concentration camp, Auschwitz actually. And so I wanted to share some of his stories because he's now gone. And I think it's up to my generation to sort of preserve that history.
I do have to say, I greatly appreciate you sharing those stories. Chapter 2 was particularly heartbreaking. I literally had to stop mid-chapter at one point because you shared the story about your cousin and how she doesn't like green food and how that saved her life. I had to put the book down for a second because, again, like the Holocaust is just a horrible piece of human history that we unfortunately should never forget. And being able to hear stories, and especially unfamous stories and stories just of everyday people, are still very important today. And I just have to say again, I appreciate you sharing those stories and the need to share those stories.
Yeah, no, I think that was very important.
Alex, you got anything?
No, I'm stuck on chapter 2.
Because, well, we can't end on a downer like that.
No. Well, it just it was just reminding me of something. My wife is her father is Latvian, and they came over after World War II. And when we got married, I took her last name, and we were sitting there talking with each other because it's a very unique last name. I asked him. He was, I think, when they came over, he was about 8 or 9, and he was born, I believe, in 41. And so I asked him, I was like, so now that I'm, family, married your daughter, how do we actually pronounce this last name? Because everyone pronounces it Lasdins.
Yeah. And
he's like, no, it's Lazdij. And both my wife and her brother turned around and went, what? We've been pronouncing our name wrong for 30-something years, and you tell him how to pronounce it right? He's like, yeah. He's like, you guys just have always had an accent, so I never bothered.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and so that prompted my wife and her brother to ask more questions because I was the one who married in and finally pronouncing it right. And they my wife and her father about 2 years ago, just for the first time since he came back from emigrated over after the World War II, they went back to Latvia to explore their family history and learn about it, because when they came over, they were just kind of like, well, we're Americans now kind of thing, but we are proud of our history. But that was one of the joys in my life, is one, learning how to pronounce the name when they couldn't, but then also her and her father being able to go together and explore some history that he had left behind during childhood, and seeing their pictures, because I didn't go with, it was just the two of them. And so, that just, it made me think of that too, that there's all these little things that we don't know from people who've survived those times and children of those times, until somebody just happens to ask on a whim, like, how do you actually pronounce that?
So the funny story about my family's surname, because my name is Michael Hirsch, but I was born Michel Hitzerovich. Michel, because I was born in a French country, Belgium. And the family surname had multiple pronunciations. Nobody in the family could agree. So I've actually seen a family tree produced by somebody in the family where there's like at least 5 different phonetic writings of it that represent different pronunciations.
Wow.
So I think everybody was happy to shorten it to Hirsch, because everybody can agree on how to pronounce it, right? And how to spell it, because the spellings were all different too. So.
Oh, really? Spellings too?
Very interesting. So, it's part of the, there's a lot of jokes about people arriving at Ellis Island or other different immigration spots, right? And the person who would sort of let them in and write up their papers would spell their names as they heard them or sounded, and they changed the names because they didn't understand their accent, right? So it's an interesting part of history.
That's something that's still happening today in media, because in the Disney Pixar film Elemental, when the Flame people immigrate into the new area, they pronounce their names, and the immigration officer is like, we're going to call you Bernie.
That's funny. Yeah. Listen, I hope people follow me on, on Instagram or Facebook, and because I'm sharing tips on, how to succeed in animation, and
yeah, we will definitely, definitely plug your Instagram and your socials. But one final question before we start all that, what do you hope, or what is your hope with making this book? What do you want people to take away from it, or what do you hope people take away from your story?
What I'd like young people to do is be inspired to go out and do their thing. If they have a passion for something, to push the boundaries and make great things that they believe in, and to never give up, because, as we were saying earlier on, you can't succeed if you're not committed, if you're not fully engaged. And I think that's what my story tells you, is you have to believe in yourself, and you have to put yourself out there and try different things till you succeed.
I think Alex put it really well when he opened up, but talking about it's a story of tenacity, and I think that probably is maybe the most apt description of your story within the book, I think. So again, we appreciate your tenacity, because for 2 people here, you brought a whole childhood of enjoyment to us, so we appreciate you and your time. But most importantly, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and share your book with us and your story.
Great.
So please let everyone know where they can find you on social media. You mentioned Instagram. What is your Instagram handle?
Yeah, it's Michael Hirsch Animation. And I think that's the Facebook. I think they can get me on Facebook in the same kind of handle.
Awesome. We will definitely have links in our episode description as well.
Okay, great. And then I'll be at San Diego Comic-Con this coming week on Thursday. I'm being interviewed by Mark Evanier, and I'll get a chance to share stories about my career.
All right. Well, if you're going to San Diego Comic-Con and you listen to us, definitely, the San Diego Comic-Con is right up anyone's alley who listens to us. So definitely find Michael, give him give him a high five for creating some of your most favorite childhood stuff, or having a hand in it at the very least. Because again, I don't know that I would have as much of a care for animation without some of the stuff, especially Care Bears, in my childhood. So,
Well, I love the fact that you really appreciate Care Bears because, it's easy to sort of think Care Bears is just like a little cartoon, but it actually was produced, as you've indicated, with a lot of love and depth.
Oh, definitely.
yeah, and you can see that even going back to that old movie, like the original movie in '85, going back to it every now and again, because everyone, nostalgia is a thing, and everyone likes to relive it, and you can see like some of the adult themes. It is an underrated classic, I think. I think because people see Care Bears, they're like, it's not as gripping as The Secret of Nim, but it's still something that I think people should experience because there's an important message behind it. And I think especially just the idea of being kind to each other and the power of love, while it's corny, I think I think it is something that is really needed, especially modernly.
All right. Well, great to speak with you, Alex and Josh. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. And then
Thank you so much.
before we sign off, can we get a quick watch Star Trek from you?
Yes. So I want everybody to watch Star Trek, and I have a very quick Star Trek story, which is that when we were producing The Faithful Wookiee, the 10-minute cartoon that introduces Boba Fett for the Star Wars universe, we felt when reading the script that it needed something to open it. And so when I mentioned that to George Lucas, he went away in another room and in 10 minutes came back with this opening that's an homage to Star Trek in that cartoon. So if you watch the cartoon, he's reading from the Star Log, and it's a nod to Star Trek because that was a big influence on George.
Very nice.
That's awesome.
Very nice.
Thank you so much, Michael. You have a great one. Good luck at Comic-Con. Have a fun time.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone, I hope you enjoyed that talk with Michael Hirsch. I am so appreciative of Michael taking the time to talk with us and share his story, and let us ask him a bunch of industry questions and career questions for him, because it's not often we get to talk to a legend in the industry, Alex.
Oh, I'm just stunned.
Yeah, it's a really cool experience because this is the first time we've ever been given like promotional materials. We got a copy of the book to go over and talk with Michael about. It's beyond awesome that we were able to do this. And for everyone listening and engaging with this episode, I appreciate you so much. This is what kind of what we want Talking Smack to be. Like, yes, we want to do the movie reviews and everything and talk comics, but getting you to talk to people in the industry is so cool when they're able and willing, and they're willing to just share stories and just answer the questions that we have. Like, we've had back-to-back weeks of amazing interviews, and I just appreciate everyone who's taking the time to listen to this. Because, yeah, it's not the big blockbuster thing, which, yeah, next week we're doing Deadpool and Wolverine, but these episodes are important too, because to what Michael was talking about, the history of everything is also important, and we need to be able to see where things are going. And I wish my internet was not being such a bastard this week, because I wanted to ask him about one of the things that came up in the book was budget, which Alex mentioned earlier. Was it seemed like they were cutting their own payroll to be able to keep everything, the lights on and everything working. And now it feels like, with the way Netflix and other streamers work, it's just like, we need to keep the revenue coming in because we're bleeding money. And I really wish I could have had the opportunity to ask him that question, because I mean, it's different times in different industries, so maybe he wouldn't have had too much to say about it, but it's rare we get to talk to someone in the industry. And it's just, we've been obsessed with streaming numbers and what streaming does to production. And so, like, to have someone who's been in the industry for over 50 years, it's a rare opportunity to ask those kind of questions. So unfortunately, I missed my chance, but hopefully we get to ask another person, or maybe Michael is generous enough to come back. I don't know. He has an open invitation, but it's been a great evening. So one more time before we get out of here, Animation Nation, How We Built a Cartoon Empire by Michael Hirsch. It's in stores now, US and Canada. It will be available in the UK and Australia on August 22nd. Links to the book on the US Amazon and Barnes & Noble site are in the episode description. Also, don't forget to join our Discord. That is also in our episode description. Please follow us on social media at Talking Smack Pod, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Hive Social, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Lonnie's website, all those wonderful places. Alex, who's doing our remix?
You know, Tim Burton is. I've decided.
Danny Elfman. Okay. Thank you to Leo Allen for our musical themes. Thank you to Beppo and Retro Whale Studios for our avatars. Email us at tsmackpod@gmail.com for your thoughts, questions, reviews. Please like, subscribe, rate, review on your podcatcher of choice. And most importantly, thank you again so much for listening. Take care. Have a great week, and we will see you next week for Deadpool and Wolverine.